Today, we are going to continue on in our distress tolerance module. But first, we are going to start with our opening mindfulness exercise. So for today, I chose to use the Calm app, and we're going to use like a quick guided mindfulness exercise. So I'm going to share my screen so you know where I got it from, and we're going to follow along together. Okay, so for those that may have the Calm app already, I'm in the tab under for work, and then I'm under the quick breaks section here. And we're going to do the Let's Unplug meditation today. Okay, so wherever you are in your space, feel free to get into a comfortable position. We'll be here for a little over 4 minutes, whether that's a mindful, like sitting position, laying down. Maybe you do best with mindful movement. So if you need to do some stretching while you listen, that is quite okay. All right, so go ahead and take a moment to get situated. And when you're ready, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Hey there, my name's Chibzo Kerike. Perhaps you've had a busy morning, struggling with a stressful project, or maybe you're heading into a hectic afternoon. Whatever the reason, you need to unplug. In this practice, we'll use our breath to help settle and calm our minds. So let's get straight into it. Start by sitting comfortably, alert yet relaxed. You can gently close your eyes if that feels good. To begin with, just take note of your breath, following it in and out of your body. We're going to deepen the breath in a minute, but for now, just noticing how the body's naturally breathing. We breathe in, the body expands. We breathe out, the body softens and relaxes. If we notice the mind is somewhere else, thinking about yesterday, worrying about today, that's okay, perfectly normal. It's what the mind does. So let's not give ourselves a hard time about it. We just gently and patiently come back to the breath and pick up where we left off. Back to that next inhale, that next exhale. And after the next minute or so, we're going to make our exhale longer than our inhale. A good way of doing this is to do a little count, making sure that your exhale count is twice as long as your inhale count. Let's give it a go together. You can follow along with me for a couple of breaths. Breathing in, 2, 3. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing in, 2, 3. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now it's up to you what you count to, just making sure that the out breath is longer than the in breath. So let's be quiet for a few moments so you can do this by yourself, counting silently in your head. This way of breathing turns on something called our relaxation response, which turns off our fight or flight response, so our mind and body can feel safe and at ease. Okay, you can let that go and allow your breath to return to normal. Noticing how the body's breathing now. Is the breath slower? Perhaps a little deeper? Sometimes it feels counterintuitive to pause when we're feeling under pressure. But taking a time out during the day can actually make us more productive in the long run. So when you're feeling frazzled, give yourself permission to unplug and take a few deep breaths to refocus the mind and relax the body. And as we draw this practice to an end, gently coming back to the room, having a little stretch if you need to, and cracking open the eyes if they were closed. Let's take one last breath in and a slow breath out. Now let's get into our day.
Just want to invite you to take any moment to reflect on what that experience was like for you. What did you notice? How did that feel? That was something that you enjoyed, feel free to also check out the Calm app. There's a lot of different quick break mindfulness exercises that you could explore and test out. Okay, so we are going to just do a quick review from last week. So last week we talked about the intro to distress tolerance skill, what a crisis is, and what makes up a crisis situation. So I'm going to share my screen to our workbook here. So you may remember that a crisis is a highly intense situation that causes extreme distress. Crisis situations are short term, so they do not last long. And we usually can't problem solve or fix the situation in the moment. Those are the three things that kind of make up a crisis situation. Okay. So I definitely want to encourage you to think about like how you notice this show up over the last week by being able to reflect on your own personal experiences throughout this last week. Did a crisis situation occur? How did you know? And see if those things met the criteria for a crisis. And I invite you to share your experiences with your individual therapist, or if you have any further questions, you can bring them into those sessions or as well as your DBT group sessions. Okay. So today we're going to be covering two different skills. We're going to talk about the stop skill, and then we're going to talk about the pros and cons skill. So we're going to first just jump right into the stop skill. The stop skill helps you hit the pause button before reacting and moving forward in a situation. So I would say that if we're thinking about using a set of skills, the stop can be one of the most important first line skills to use, right? It helps us to actually hit the pause button and stop what we're doing to be able to then proceed with other skills. So I want to say it's almost like the first line of defense when we think about our skills and stacking skills. The stop one is a really good first skill to use. So let's talk about what this skill actually means. So with a lot of things in DBT, the STOP is an acronym to help us remember the different ways that we can practice this. So it's an acronym to help us remember to freeze and pause before taking action, right? So this is a really helpful skill, especially if we do struggle with impulsivity or responding and acting on our emotions in the heat of the moment. This is going to be a really key and crucial skill if that's something that you have a difficult time with. It does help us slow the process down to minimize our reactivity as well as impulsivity, like I was saying. So the S in stop actually stands for stop, right? So being able to stop what you're doing, freeze in the moment, hit the pause button. So for some of us, this might actually mean like physically stop, right? If we are in the moment of a heat of an argument, we can practice this by actually stopping what we're saying. Maybe it means that we walk away for a moment, but it's actually stopping. The T, take a break. So take a few moments to remove yourself from the situation, right? So maybe walking away, take a few breaths, count to 10, do something that allows your brain to take a few minutes to step away from the situation. The O is observe. So this won't be new for a lot of us that learned the what skills a few weeks ago. So it's really tapping into that mindfulness skill of observing and noticing your environment without judgment. take in your surroundings and just observe and notice what is around you. Notice what you feel in your body and notice any sensations that may be communicating to you. So it's really almost like this moment to take inventory. What's happening in your environment and what's happening within your body. Being able to just name those and label that can give us information on how we want to move forward, which is like our next step here, which is the P. So proceed mindfully, right? So once we're able to gather the data, the information by observing after we've taken a break, we can use wise mind to respond accordingly. We can act with awareness and intention, consider your options to then intentionally make a decision on how you want to move forward. So that's really what the stop is. It's all about stopping, taking a break, noticing what's going on to then be able to proceed mindfully. And that proceed mindfully really can just be like, okay, what do I need to do next? Which might be another DBT skill. And oftentimes it is another DBT skill. We often say that it takes sometimes multiple skills to be able to work through a situation. And a lot of times, stop might be that first skill that you do to pause, reflect, and then figure out your next steps. Right. And so you might stop and realize that it's really difficult to, or you might, but maybe noticing that you're having like urges to act in emotion mind. And that might be engaging in a target behavior, saying something we might later regret, lashing out, right? And so instead of doing that, maybe we need to practice another skill. And we're going to learn a slew of distress tolerance skills in the next few weeks. So stay tuned because this skill can be really helpful to figure out, all right, now what do I do? All right, how to practice. Take a few deep breaths when entering into a crisis situation, being able to try and slow down, notice and connect with our breath, which might even help calm our heart rate down a little bit. Take inventory of your environment and what you feel in your body. So again, being able to just notice what's happening. Create a pros and cons list to help with making a wise mind decision. We're going to talk in a few moments about how to create a DBT pros and cons list, because it's a little different than a regular pros and cons list. All right, let's talk through some examples. You hear someone say something hurtful about you. Here's how you can practice the stop skill. You would stop, not move, and just take a pause. Take a break by giving yourself space and perhaps leaving the area. Observe what you feel in your body. Label the emotions you are experiencing. Notice your options and then write them down, write them out. Maybe you pull out your notes app on your phone. You write out what are some options that you have. What feels the best way to move forward? You can ask yourself that. Maybe you want to approach them at a later time to let them know how you feel. Maybe you have the urge to get revenge and say something mean to them. Identify the consequences for each choice and choose what aligns with your values. Can you relate to the above situation? How could you practice the stop skill with a similar situation? So go ahead and take a moment to write some of your thoughts down. Feel free to pause the video to answer these questions. All right. Now that you're back, we are going to do a little story time. So Morgan, who uses she, her pronouns, practiced using stop when she was feeling intense sadness and wanted to engage in a target behavior. She noticed the urges and walked out of her room. Instead of being alone, she decided to watch a movie with her younger sister to surround herself with others. The stop skill helped her make a decision to pause before acting on a target behavior and choose a different path by spending time with her sister. So the questions below here, can you relate to the above situation? How could you practice the stop skill with a similar situation? So again, go ahead and reflect on those questions, jot down your responses, hit the pause button, and we'll resume. Okay. So here are some ways that you can practice at home. So you can practice with yourself before reacting impulsively. Pause and ask yourself, what could be a better response? Practice stepping away for a few moments and responding in a more effective way. You can practice with a peer by sharing an example with a friend of when you may struggle with impulsivity. Ask their input on how you would respond differently. Practice pausing together and noticing different ways to respond to stressful situations. Then you can practice with a parent or caregiver by talking to your parent about a recent experience where you found it difficult. To pause before reacting. Seek their guidance on making more thoughtful choices. Okay, and this is what you'll be doing over the next week. Share how you practice the stop skill with either yourself, a parent, or a caregiver. Was it effective? What did you notice? What was different when practicing the stop skill? The next question, how did you feel before and after you practiced the stop skill? Write the emotion and the intensity before and after. Remember, not all DBT skills are intended to make you feel better, and that is okay. Right? Sometimes a lot of in DBT skills, it's all about maybe just helping you get through the moment. And that might not even feel great, but it's helping you get through the moment without making it worse. Okay. So we're going to move on to our pros and cons skill. And this concept most likely will not be a new concept for you, right? We've heard of weighing out your options, weigh out the pros and cons. However, we do it a little bit more intentionally when we think about doing it from a DBT lens. So we're going to talk about what this looks like. So the DBT pros and cons skill helps you to move forward, balancing wise mind and making more effective decisions without acting on impulse. So what you need to know. So with doing a DBT pros and cons skill, we're actually taking a look at all the different angles and the different options. So you're essentially making 4 different lists. We're looking at the pros of acting on an urge. What would be the good things about acting on a target behavior? Then we're looking at the cons of acting on an urge. So what would be the difficult thing or challenging things of acting on that urge or target behavior? So you do that part first. And then we look at the pros and cons of what it would look like for you to act opposite, to act skillfully, to use your skills here. So what would be the pros of acting skillfully? So doing something different instead of acting on an urge. And then what would be the cons of acting skillfully? And what this does is it really allows you to look at all the different options here, all the different angles. There may be some that can overlap a little bit, but that's okay. Still write all the options down. Even if it feels at times a little bit repetitive, it's still really helpful to be able to zoom out and look at each different box. The second step that you do, and we'll talk about this a little bit more too, is after you create your list, you are going to go back and look at what are some short-term consequences as well as long-term consequences, because that also is added information, added data to help us make a more informed decision by looking at what would be the short-term consequences, what would be the long-term consequences of this decision. Okay. So how to practice. Try some of these ways to practice the pros and cons. Create a list of the pros and cons of acting on the urge. Like I said, create a pros and cons for not acting on your urge or using skills. Go back through the list and identify short-term and long-term consequences. Talk through your options with a peer or a caregiver. So that's always something that can be really helpful too, because they may have insight that might be able to add something that you didn't realize or didn't think of that can be helpful to gain some perspective. All right, and then we're going to look at the next page for some specific examples. All right, so in this example, we're going to talk about Tony, who uses he, him pronouns, is using the skill to help with making the decision if he should use substances or not. So let's take look at the first column. The pros of acting on the urge, the pros of engaging in using substances, right? Might feel good in the moment. You might give into peer pressure and may perceive acceptance from friends. So maybe Tony's friends are all engaging in using substances and Tony wants to feel accepted. Another pro that Tony identifies is that it temporarily numbs his emotions. Let's look at the cons of acting on urges. May feel worse in the long run, right? Sometimes a lot of times when we use substances, the day after, several days after, we may not feel great physically, emotionally. Parents may find out, and then we would get in trouble, which could create some consequences. Substances cost money. That can play a factor. Friends may not want to hang out with him if overindulged. So friends may not want to engage with Tony if Tony's like overusing the substances, and there can be some consequences with that. Lastly here, decision making becomes impaired and he may act impulsively or in a way that this gets cut off here, or in a way that maybe doesn't align with Tony's values or the values of his friends. And there may be even more pros and cons to these that you might think of on your own. And so you can take even a few moments to think about, is there anything that isn't captured here that you may see as a pro or a con? Okay. The next portion here, pros of acting skillfully and cons of acting skillfully. So the pros of acting skillfully, it might be harder in the moment, right? Like it might be just really easy for us to just say yes and engage in substances, but we might feel better afterwards. We might feel a sense of pride or accomplishment that, like, yes, I was able to say no, I was able to make a really effective decision. Maybe our parents or loved ones are proud and we won't get in trouble. There won't be any consequences, or we might not be grounded or things getting taken away from us. Helps Tony reach his goals and get closer to his achievements. And the cons of acting skillfully takes more effort, right? Harder for us to maybe choose that. And then Tony's friends may not approve. So maybe there is that lack of acceptance or feeling included in social settings. Okay, I want you to give this a try now by thinking about a specific situation that applies to you. So maybe it's the pros of acting on a target behavior, pros of and cons of maybe staying in a relationship, whatever it might be that is applicable to you. So go ahead and start writing some things down. You can pause this video as you write and then resume and hit play when you're done. Okay, curious what people noticed as you were engaging in this list. Is there one that has a lot more items underneath of it, similar to Tony's, where we see that there's a lot of cons for acting on the urge, right? And there's a lot of pros for acting skillfully. And so noticing how those maybe outweigh the pros of acting on the urge and the cons of acting skillfully. Okay. So curious if you notice a similar pattern. All right. So let's do our story time now. So Katie, who uses she, they pronouns, wants to go out to a party with friends, but has to take the SATs the next morning. They struggle with missing out on things and are afraid they will miss out on something fun if they stay home. Katie and her mom sit down to write out a pros and cons list so Katie can make an effective decision using Wise Mind. Although Katie has had more pros for going to the party, she recognized the short-term and long-term consequences outweighed the pros of going because she wants to get into a college. Katie decided to stay in and use the support of her mom to get through missing out on the party. We're going to help Katie by writing out some points for them. Even though they made the decision, let's just look at some of these options here. Identify what would be short-term and long-term consequences. All right, so I'm going to, all right. What would be some pros of staying home? So some that I can think of be being able to get a good night's sleep. You'd be able to engage in self-care the night before. Eat a good meal the night before / morning, taking it. You have time to study any or review any sort of last minute concepts. There's probably a lot more that some of you can think of, but just for sake of time, I'm going to keep moving on here. All right. What would be some cons of staying home? Oh, ah, sucks. Here we go. Potentially missing out on something fun. Fix this here. Missing out on something fun. Cons of staying home can just like maybe we feel excluded from friends. Maybe we have to tolerate feeling bored at home. Okay. Let's see. Thinking about short-term and long-term consequences before we go to the next part. Some short-term consequences could be that we feel rested for SATs. Long-term consequences could be potentially doing really well SATs, which help chances of getting into college. Short-term consequences, maybe just feeling sad or anxious about staying home. Long-term consequences. The only thing I can think of is if there's some sort of fallout with friends because of making the decision, but I imagine that would be pretty unlikely, but we can at least put it here. Potential friendships. I'm just gonna put but unlikely in parentheses. Okay. Let's talk about pros of going to the party. Would potentially be really fun. Pros of going to the party, getting to spend quality time with friends. Again, there's probably more, but for sake of time, just going to keep it moving here. Cons of going to the party could be not getting well rested, sleeping up, and not feeling well, which could potentially impact how you perform on SATs. Maybe we might be more likely to engage in a target behavior. And then let's think about short-term and long-term consequences for both. So short-term consequences of going to the party, be fun in the moment. long-term consequences could impact, that wouldn't be a pro. I guess maybe just like long-term consequences could be strengthen friendships. Cons of going to the party, short-term consequences. Here could be, let's see, we might not feel well. Long-term impacts. Depending on what your target behavior is, there could be some long-term consequences with that if you do engage in target behavior. Let's see. And again, you can think of probably a lot more here. I'm just coming up on the spot. So could have long-term impacts if engaged in target behavior. Okay, so you get the idea here. This is like a really brief snapshot of what this looks like, of practicing the pros and cons list here and looking at the short-term, long-term consequences. So again, maybe give this a shot with a situation that you have or a decision that you're trying to make. This is a really good one to write everything out and look at all the different angles here. Okay. So for home practice, here are some ways that you can practice this. You practice this with yourself by thinking about a time when you acted on impulse. Reflect on that situation and write out a pros and cons list to consider how you could have responded differently. You can practice this with a peer or friend by starting a discussion with your friend about the times that you have and being able to write those out. But the time that you have acted on impulse versus not, I feel like that probably should have been a little bit clearer there. And then with a parent or caregiver, talk to your parent about a recent experience where you found it difficult to pause before reacting. Seek their guidance on making more thoughtful choices. Okay. So then your turn over this next week. Share how you practice the pros and cons skill with either yourself, a peer, or a caregiver this week. Note, was it effective? What did you notice? What was different when practicing the pros and cons skill? And then how did you feel before and after you practiced the pros and cons skill? Write the emotion, the intensity before and after. And that last reminder, remember, not all DBT skills are intended to make you feel better. And that is okay. All right, so practice that over the next week with the stop skill as well as the pros and cons. And then next week, we'll just continue to move along in our distress tolerance module. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up on your individual therapist as well as your DBT group leaders. All right, thank you for watching and have a good rest of your day.